Welcome to Messiah's Mighty Men. This is your host, Michael. Join Benjamin, Roger, and I, along with our special guests each month as we discuss the biblical Hebrew roots of the Scriptures. Learn and grow into one of Messiah's mighty men. Let us now begin today's discussion. This is the first episode in a new series that we're doing called Messiah's Mighty Men. And I'm really excited about this series. I feel like this is really important. Men are under assault in our modern age, and we really need to know what it is and what it means to be a man from the Scriptures. And helping us tonight, we have Eliyahu. Shalom, Eliyahu.
Shalom, Michael. It's great to be here and have a chance to share about this.
Great having you on. And you expressed to me that you have a lot of revelation in this subject, and this is something that you really like sharing. I know you have a book that you have written. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about that.
I'd like to do that. Just like to hold up my book. People can see it. Holy Order Restored. And I actually wrote that book 30 years ago. So this whole dilemma that men are facing today has been something very much on my mind and heart, and I have received revelation that you'll find in this book. You'll also find in this book things regarding my own journey as Yahweh's man, and I think it's kind of a unique perspective, and if you get a chance, if you haven't seen it yet, I think it's especially of interest to the men, but I think the ladies would enjoy it too, because it sets out the whole order that Yahweh has for both men and women. So a lot of people have enjoyed reading it.
We're working on building up Yahweh's nation.
Yes.
And it's really important that Yahweh's men know what it means to be Yahweh's men and to step up and do their part. That's where it all starts.
We are living at such an important point in time, and there is so much against Yahweh's men right now. So our perception of who we are and what we need to do needs to be very clear and very sharp, so that we will be able to do all that Yahweh has in mind for each of us individually during this important time period.
Absolutely. We have some more help with us tonight. I'd like to introduce Brother Benjamin. Shabbat Shalom, Brother Benjamin.
Shabbat Shalom, guys, and Remnant family.
Great to see you, Benjamin.
It's great to see you, E.
And also helping us tonight is Judah. Hello, Judah.
Hey, Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
I'd like to get started tonight. Now, Eliyahu, you've prepared some slides for us. I know that you've expressed to me that you've been really wanting to teach on King David, and he's very misunderstood, but very important figure in the Scriptures. And so I'm really looking forward to this.
Well, he is very important. You know, when he came along about 1,000 years before Yeshua, the nation of Israel had gotten to a place where it was probably at near an all-time low up to that time. And really, David arising on the scene when he did totally turned everything around. And it was a huge job that he took on. And he succeeded marvelously by doing the things that Yahweh said. You notice I have a verse here from Acts chapter 15, or 13 actually. And it says, Yahweh raised up David to be their king, to whom he also testified, I found David, the son of Jesse, a man after my heart, who will do all my will.
Amen.
Wouldn't you love to have Yahweh say that about you?
Yes.
That he found you, and you're that special person. You're that man that will do all of his will, not just part of his will. And that's what this is about. You see, that's very rare. I've known a lot of good men in my life and know a lot of good men right now. And I've seen, though, that these men that will do all of his will are extremely rare. And what I'm hoping is if we focus on this together and focus on the example of David too, who did all of his father's will, that we can change some of that, where our focus can be different. Sometimes I've heard people say things like, well, I held back from doing that because, well, it was God's highest will for me, but I didn't feel it was really right for me right now, or things like that. Have any of you ever heard people say that?
Yeah.
Yes.
What do you think about that? Do you think Yahweh has like two different wills for us, where he's got one for us if we are just really ambitious and we really want to follow him, and then he has this lesser will that's okay for the dumb guys who won't follow him? What do you think?
That's not true.
Yeah.
I think that might be popular in some religious circles where people think that way.
Yeah.
Well, wow, that is so misleading, that very thinking. And if you are in a group of people where people think like that and behave like that, then you need to consider if that's who you want to be, or whether you want to be like David.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the whole impetus behind what I see here in this discussion. We want to be the real deal. And it isn't easy. It isn't easy going from sort of a half-baked kind of believer to actually being a man like David. But we can do it.
Yes.
We can do it.
Looking at that scripture, and as I was going through the study and then day to day, I just keep being reminded of David doing all of Yahweh's will, and I think if we kind of think about that, then, and we want to be that man that does all of Yahweh's will, we can work towards that.
Right. And I think we do need to be realistic. It's a growing process, but it's one that we must definitely undertake if we are going to reach our full potential in his kingdom. Well, we have a picture here. We have David out in the field taking care of the sheep, and there's nobody else there. There's just David in the wilderness. And you know what? He might have started this, probably did start this when he was like 10 years old, and maybe even younger.
Yeah.
Because that's how it has always been in agrarian societies. The kids start really pretty early doing their share for their family. And this is the kind of job that they could give a kid to do. And so David did this, and he was off by himself a lot, taking care of the sheep. You would think some people would say, well, gee, what about his education? He was getting an education. This was Yahweh's classroom that he was in, and he was learning, and he was having lots of time that he could spend with Yahweh, and he didn't waste that. And besides that, he learned how to make a harp. He probably made it himself, and he learned how to play the harp. He learned how to write songs. He was a poet. Did all this as a boy. Probably did a lot of other things that boys like to do. I know when I was a boy on the farm, I liked catching frogs in the pond. I liked doing things outdoors. This kind of stuff doesn't happen so much for boys today, but I was in nature a lot, and I had time to think about God. I read the Bible, and I thought a lot about these heroes that I found in the scriptures. And I think that gives me sort of a sense of what it was like for David out there while he's watching the sheep. So all this time this is going on with David, would anybody think that he's going to become the king of Israel while this is happening?
No.
Not likely.
Not looking at it in just the flesh, just the natural,
They really wouldn't think it, would they? He wouldn't think it either, would he?
No.
No.
And we found out when Samuel came, Yahweh sent Samuel to his house and said, I'm going to show you the person to anoint as the next king.
Wow.
All of his brothers were there. His father was there. And Samuel went through all of them, and none of them even thought of David.
Wow.
None of them even thought that he could be the one. So this is how it was for David. But of course, this is how it ended up. He was the choice. He was Yahweh's choice, and he was anointed to be king. And he's just a lad. He's just a teenager at the time. So this is David's start. This is where he begins as a shepherd boy, highly underestimated. You know, when I was in school, I was mostly a B and C student. I was just an average guy, right? Who would think that I would go on to write books and do the things I do. But for me, the reason I was like a B and C student is because I was interested in a lot of other things,
Yeah.
including Yahweh. And I think this is true of a lot of boys. The whole academic thing is not what they're interested in. And now what do we do with boys that don't want to act like girls? We just drug them up, don't we? And send them to school anyway. And I think the way we're treating boys today is abuse. We're just, I mean, it's terrible, really, what you see happening to boys. And their spirit is being killed before they can ever even grow up. This is what is happening in the system that we have today. And every once in a while, you'll have one of them that'll completely go bonkers and go shoot a lot of his friends and teachers at the school, right? And then everybody wonders, well, why did that happen?
Yeah.
He has so much anger, he never sees his parents. He's in prison all day long, every day. They want to put him on this drugs every day. Yeah, he's angry. And certainly we're not saying what he does, the boy that goes and shoots people, we're not saying that's okay. But we're just saying there's something really wrong with our society.
Yeah.
And all of us who are males of any age at this point in time, we have all suffered from it. We have all suffered because of it.
Yeah.
And I really would like the men that are listening to me to understand that we know that. We understand. We don't want to expect something impossible from you. We don't want you to think that we do, because we know there's a lot to overcome to rise up above all of this and be the man that Yahweh wants you to be. But David is such a fantastic example because he did rise up over being, well, basically just undervalued by everybody around him. Here's just a little question I put in. What lessons can be learned from David's boyhood? What do you think?
Well, you know, one of the things that I just see from this is we've come so far from what Yahweh's plans are and what his intentions are for a man. And you can really see his intentions in how David's life played out as during his boyhood. You know, I see that there was this really crucial time when he was separated and completely focused on that connection with Yahweh and growing himself spiritually.
Mm-hmm.
And that would become so crucial in his life and growing up into a man. That would be so crucial. And also really his focus being so devoted to Yahweh,
Yes.
I think is the other big thing.
Cool.
that
That's
I
very
see.
cool.
You know, something I like too is he was a shepherd. And really, I think that that's a very good character attribute for any leader in Israel, is being a shepherd. There was a time where he saved the sheep from a lion and a bear. I mean, it says he grabbed the lion by the beard.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, that's pretty bold. I think that's going beyond the call of duty there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But, you know, when he had a job and he took responsibility for it,
Yeah.
And there's a lesson in that too.
Yeah.
Yeah. When Samuel came to anoint a son of Jesse, he wasn't there. He told him to sanctify his sons. He wasn't there. So that, there's something not right there. So here he is out in the field as a shepherd, as Michael says, and stuff like that. You would know the heart of Yahweh. This boy needs attention. And I think that's how it all started, where it was very easy for this boy to hook up with Yahweh, and he could just see how wonderfully he was. And I think that, the relationship just flourished. And what else could you do but want to do something more than just talk? So he praised him. He found these instruments, started praising him and stuff like that. And as Michael said there, he must have had such a relationship with him, because he even says in the Psalms, Yahweh trained his hands to war. So that's how he did all these accolades of protecting the sheep and stuff like that. So, I think maybe that's how it kind of happened.
I think that's very insightful, Benjamin. It reminds me of when I was a boy on the farm. I had a wall in my bedroom where I had my bow and my arrows. I had a commando knife my brother gave me. I had a throwing axe. I had just all kinds of stuff like this, okay, that guys like.
Yeah.
And it freaked out some people. It didn't freak out any farm people, though, all right? But if city people came to visit us and they happened to come in my room, totally freaked them out. And I used to love to go out into the field and practice throwing my commando knife into the tree or shooting my arrows. I could have killed a lion with that.
Yeah.
Because if you spend hours upon hours just practicing with these things, you get pretty good at that.
Yeah.
And I totally freaked out my family when they saw me one day with my sister, my older sister. She was throwing pie plates up into the air and I was shooting them with arrows. So I'm glad I survived, and I'm really glad my sister survived. But I'm just saying, for a lot of folks today, it's hard to understand that mentality of country kind of people and how they live and so on. But what you're saying about him teaching David's hands to war just kind of brings that all back in my own boyhood.
Yeah, definitely. Well, that shows you how he could actually come to a place where Yahweh could say he would do his own will. I mean, being young like that and just alone, but the Creator, revealing himself to him just as he would have been overwhelming. And so, he wasn't bored, I'm sure.
Yeah, you're right.
Judah, would you like to read?
Sure. 1 Samuel 17, 4-7. There went out a champion out of the camp of the Philistines named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span, about 10 feet. The staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his spear's head weighed 600 shekels of iron, and his shield bearer went before him.
And all of the men of Israel were arguing with each other over which one gets to go and kill him, right?
Right.
That's what should have happened.
No, exactly.
At least half of them.
Yeah. Yeah. As that other line points out, they were all greatly afraid.
Oh, yes.
They were greatly afraid.
Even Saul.
Yeah. You didn't see him going out there with his sword, did you?
No.
Yeah.
He was taller than them all. So,
No, is this realistic that they would all be afraid of a man 10 foot tall with all of this equipment?
Yeah.
sure.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, isn't this is what the natural man would do. The natural man looks at this and says, whoa, I don't want any part of that, right?
I'm out.
That's right. So now let's go on to our hero. You come to me with a sword and with a spear and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of Yahweh of hosts. Today Yahweh will deliver you into my hand, that all the earth may know that there is an Elohim in Israel.
Amen.
See how real all of that was to him.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it wasn't David's glory, you know?
Right, right. He's incensed. David is incensed over this giant and all of his blasphemy.
Yes, definitely.
And he couldn't stand it.
Yes.
And you know, the interesting thing is when you read the story, all of his brothers don't want him to even talk about this giant, let alone do something about it, right?
Yeah.
They're all saying, well, how come you aren't back home taking care of the sheep? This is none of your business.
Mm-hmm.
He's still not old enough to be in the army.
Wow.
Yeah.
He's still a teenager.
Yeah.
He's not even old enough to be in the army. And I think you can say, because of this incident, that he is a greater man than all of the fighting men of Israel.
He was.
Wouldn't you have to say that?
Yeah.
Mhm.
As a teenager.
Wow.
So I think that's an amazing thing. I mean, a lot of us have heard the story, but when we think of the reality behind the story, it's quite amazing. And after this, who was fearful?
Philistines.
Philistines.
They were all running.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They were all running. Yeah.
You know, another thing I see here is he was just kind of shocked that no one else was doing anything. You
Yes.
know,
Yes.
he's hearing Goliath blaspheme Elohim like this, and he's like, "Why isn't anyone doing anything?" And then from their point of view, they're thinking, "Are you kidding? This guy's 10 feet tall."
Really?
You know, and just seeing how much he, as a man, had already grown and developed and strengthened in his relationship with Yahweh, and
Mm-hmm.
he was ready to take this giant out.
Yeah.
You know, that is so true. And I think this is a point where every man has to look at his own life and say, am I one of those men that is always waiting for someone else to step up and do it? Or am I going to be like David and be the one to step up and do it?
Right?
Because really, all the men of Israel should be like this, shouldn't they?
Yeah.
Yes. We should all have that relationship with Yahweh there. I look at this, you have to go back a little bit there. We were talking about he took out the lion and he took out the bear. The next verse in Samuel here, 47, says, the battle belongs to the Lord.
Amen.
So he already knew that the Lord was his help and the battle was his. He's looking at, well, the Lord allowed me to take out a bear and a lion. Who's this uncircumcised giant? And I mean, that's because of his relationship with Yahweh.
That's right.
I don't see how you would have that kind of muster without
Really?
him training you to take on the giants.
And I think, too, it has to do with his heart.
Yeah.
His love for Yahweh
Mm.
was such that he wanted to do it, you know?
That's right.
Mm.
He felt impelled to take responsibility to
Yeah.
get this done. And I think that's pretty fantastic. And this is what we want to see here in these final days regarding Yahweh's nation. We want to see those 144,000 men who follow Messiah wherever he goes step up and get it done.
Mhm.
This is our opportunity to be like David. Let's go to the next one. What lessons could the men of Israel learn from David and Goliath?
Well, I think we already mentioned that he's showing them that the battle is the Lord's. Our help comes from the Lord.
I think we need to show up and bring what we have to the table for Yahweh to use it, you know?
Yes.
David brought the sling and stones with him, and that's what he had to bring, and his faith in Yahweh and doing Yahweh's will. And I think that we need to do that too. Bring what you have and do what Yahweh says, do his will, and
Mhm.
Yahweh will make it work.
Yeah.
I so agree with you. I think that's the biggest thing is showing up with what you've got and giving and doing what you can.
Yeah.
And we might not all be the guy that steps out into the field and kills the giant. But whatever it is we can do, we need to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that's awesome.
Yeah. And he above all, I think he wanted to honor Yahweh's name.
Yes.
Right.
In all the earth, he said. In all the earth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right.
That's right. So Saul liked him. What's not to like? He just killed a 10-foot giant, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's got to be great to have him in your court.
Yeah, I think he made Saul look good.
Yeah, I mean, at least initially.
Yeah, right. Initially.
Yeah. And you notice it says about David that he behaved himself wisely. And remember, he's still an adolescent. So you don't have to be 70 years old to be a wise person. You can be 20 and be a wise person if you've spent that time, as David obviously did, with Yahweh and learning from him.
That's right.
So, you know what? I mean, just imagine this. At his age, Saul now sets him over the men of war.
Yeah.
He's now the captain of the entire army.
Wow.
And he's not even old enough yet to join the army. But, you know, you kill giants, and this is the sort of stuff that happens, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, see the next one.
1 Samuel chapter 19, verses 9 and 10. An evil spirit from Yahweh was on Saul as he sat in his house with his spear in his hand, and David was playing with his hand. Saul sought to pin David even to the wall with the spear, but he slipped away out of Saul's presence, and he struck the spear into the wall. David fled and escaped that night.
Oh, boy. Anybody want to talk about this one?
Well, we know back a little ways in a war before all this David thing there, where Saul was quite disobedient, and Samuel, through his unrepentantness, came and told him the word of Yahweh that that Yahweh had rejected him. And when Samuel anointed David, it said that an evil spirit, came on Saul. So I think this is kind of the picture, probably where it comes down to where he's a different person now.
Yes.
His love was there for him, but now there's a lot more. He's a different man now.
I just want to say it's kind of interesting because he was both at once.
Yeah.
This is how demonized people are, by the way.
Yes.
They're both at once. They're like two different personalities at the same time. And sometimes the demonic personality will do things like this.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And they cannot be trusted. So it says David fled and escaped that night.
Yeah.
Smart thing to do.
The women of Israel and stuff like that there, when David was coming back from the wars and stuff like that there, they were saying Saul was killing 1,000 and David was killing his 10,000.
Yes.
So there was quite a lot of pride and jealousy, I think, building up there too.
Absolutely. Absolutely true. And this does speak to something that happens between men, right? Men a lot of times are very competitive.
Yeah.
And it can make you angry when somebody else seems to be winning.
Yeah.
And I'm just saying, this is a time for us to kind of be careful.
Yeah.
Right? When that's happening, so that we don't let competitiveness cause us to sin.
Yes.
And in something big like this, you can't beat Yahweh's will. I mean, it's foolish for Saul to think, well, if I can just get rid of this guy, I can keep being king. Because he didn't become king on his own. It was because Yahweh had him anointed as king.
Right.
And he wasn't going to be able to keep that position simply through force.
Yeah.
And this is true with people around us. We might see other brothers that might excel in some way that we would like to, But getting them out of the way is not going to get you what you're looking for.
Yeah.
So it's just something to think about. Let's go on to the next one. So why did Saul favor David and want to kill him at the same time?
Well, he was demonized. David made him look good initially, but then Saul got jealous and, was under the influence of the devil.
Yes. And let me just say, the reason he was demonized is because he was disobedient
Yeah.
to Yahweh. And when you are habitually disobedient to Yahweh, this opens the door for evil spirits to come into your life and torment you. So don't do that.
Yeah.
Where it says he was for David. Well, when Saul asked him to come, Jesse to send his son, it said he loved David. So he must have been such a hit with him, whatever like that. And then also when he was playing the harp, he was comforting him. So there was a lot for him to really join himself to David. And he just must have been such a blessing in every other way too. It's hard to believe that this could happen, but we know with the demons in the way that this could happen.
That's right.
Judah, did you have something you were going to share?
Yeah, I had a few things I was going to say. I just think it's interesting because here's another time where we see David playing the harp. And this shows us really how good of a musician he must have been because, the servants actually suggested that maybe it would have calmed Saul to bring David and because of his beautiful music. And I thought that was interesting. But the other thing that I was really seeing in this was just that when we're looking at this whole story, I really see Yahweh sort of testing Saul and sort of showing up his flesh man, kind of exposing his flesh man through the whole story. I mean, from the moment that Yahweh officially anointed David and that switched over, so to speak, and now Saul is having these events continually happen where, Yahweh's completely in control and he's just showing up Saul's flesh man is where I really see too in this. And that, Yahweh's will is what's going to end up happening, even if there is some opposition by people who aren't totally on board with Yahweh. They're kind of in opposition to him in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
I kind of feel like Yahweh does that. Like if we've got an issue in our flesh, he likes to bring that to the surface so we can deal with it.
It's true. Yes. Okay, so I'm not going to go too deeply into these maps, but I just want to talk about some of the events that happened while David was fleeing from Saul. Because from this point forward, that's what's happening. I mean, it looks like it's at least a 10-year period that David is just being chased from one cave to another and his life constantly in danger. And we want to look and kind of see some of the things that happened. At one point, David felt he needed to totally get out of Judah because it was that bad. So he went to the king of Gath, which was a Philistine city, and he pretended to be mad. He pretended that he was crazy. Wow. And he acted crazy. He even let spittle fall down on his beard, and he looked all weird. And so the king kind of felt like, well, he's no threat to us because he's lost his mind. And indeed, a lot of people would have lost their mind if they'd been through what he'd been through with Saul.
Yeah.
And I think this was very resourceful of David. And I just would like to point out that to use deception in warfare is what war is all about. You don't deceive your friends. You don't deceive your family. You don't deceive your nation. But enemies of God, this is how war works. So, some people would complain about David, oh, how come he's deceiving? That's part of warfare, so get over it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He was a smart man.
He was, and very resourceful.
He was, because it said the king was saying, "Oh, here's David. Here's the one that slays 10,000s, whatever." And he's going, this is not going to wash. So yeah, he went into his bag of tricks.
Yeah.
Isn't there enough madmen in my city that you bring one to entertain me or something?
Yeah.
And I have to say about this that this may have been something that Yahweh put on him to do.
Yeah.
I've had situations where I've done things and then afterwards I realized it was Yahweh that made me do them. For instance, like one day, quite a long time ago, I was going to go for a walk and I was drinking a soda. It was nice. A glass had ice in it and stuff. And I was going to put it down and go for a walk. And I just had this feeling, no, I need to take it with me. So I was walking along and all of a sudden, this pit bull came running out from between these two cars and right over to me. And he was going to gnaw my leg off. And I just leaned forward and all the ice and soda came out of my glass right into his face. And then he went running away.
Wow. Yeah.
And I thank Yahweh because I believe it was Yahweh that did it. So, some of the strange things you read about David or other men of God, and you say, well, why did he do that? It may very well be that he did it the same reason I took that soda with me.
Yeah.
Yes.
Let's go to the next one. Okay, so this is talking about when David was hiding in the cave of Adullam. And we want to note, I think this is important, his brothers and all his father's house came and joined him there. So notice that David now, by this time, had totally changed the perception of his family towards him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
By what he did. So he didn't kowtow up to them. He didn't say, oh, please, see me for who I am or any of this kind of stuff. He just was who he was. They saw it. And now they're joining themselves to David. I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then it says, everyone who was in distress, everyone who is in debt, everyone who is discontented gathered themselves to him, and he became captain over them. And there were with him about 400 men. So I think this is really something, because here, even though he's done these amazing things, realize he's a young guy, maybe he's in his early 20s now. And here's 400 men that have come to join to him. And they're basically the outlaw class that are not really wanted in Judah. And so they come to join themselves to him, and he accepts them. So I think that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, once again, just really a smart move. I mean, and they all understood really what was going on, I think, between, who's the fraud and who's the real, you know what I'm saying? In that sense.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm sure they were very discontent with the administration of Saul.
Yes. Yes, no doubt.
Yeah.
And it makes me think if they joined up to David, it's because they thought that maybe that's the place where they could make a difference.
Yeah.
Yes.
I could see why his family would come, because they knew of his anointing and and the rejection of Saul. But these others, he must have had a name out there for sure.
I believe so. And of course, when they came, they joined him in a cave.
Yeah.
Right? So obviously they were willing to accept some hardship.
Yeah.
And I think that's important to realize. Okay, let's check the next one. Okay, so what do you think? Why did the 400 join up with David? We've been talking about that a little bit, but any other thoughts about it?
I think we covered quite a lot of it there. He was the rightful, anointed one. And Michael mentioned that I'm sure they were going, there's no justice or anything going on in here, whatever like that. So,
I think men need a leader, don't you?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
A leader they can respect.
And they could trust them too, you know?
You're right. That's right.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of cool.
They wanted someone who was real. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Because, you know, I think so many people in Judea probably were living kind of that fake life and not being very real. And David was a real person. He had a real relationship. And that's what they were looking for, is a real leader, you know?
That's right.
So I think that could be another thing.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I see.
Awesome. Well, this is an incident that happened, and these aren't necessarily all in chronological order, but the king with his men went after David, and this was actually quite early after David had left to escape from Saul. So David had gone to the priests that were located at a place called Nob in order to get help. And that's where the sword of Goliath was. And he got the showbread from the priests.
Yeah.
And they helped him. So then the king showed up and he killed the priests. Actually, he had an Edomite in his service that he enlisted. The Israelites wouldn't do it.
Yeah, the guards, they knew better. They wouldn't do it.
Right.
He wouldn't kill the priest. Yeah.
Yeah, but the Edomite, he didn't care, and he killed 85 priests. 85 priests. This tells you how far gone Saul was, right?
Yeah, where was the court case for that, right?
Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
Pretty crazy. Okay, so there was one of the sons of Ahimelech, the son of Ahitub, named Abiathar, that escaped. And this is such an amazing thing that happened, because although it doesn't mention it in this particular slide, when he escaped with the Urim and the Tumim,
Yeah.
the breastplate of the high priest, and he had it with him. So ever after that, David was able to inquire directly of Yahweh through the Urim and the Tumim of the priest to get answers. And I'm sure this was really a tremendous help to David. It's like Yahweh just kept giving stuff to David that was going to help him on his path.
Yeah.
It's quite amazing. But when Abiathar told him what had happened, David said, I knew on that day when Doeg the Edomite was there that he would surely tell Saul, I am responsible for the death of all the persons of your father's house. What do you think about David saying that? Any ideas?
Maybe he kind of knew that an Edomite couldn't be trusted. You know, he wouldn't care about the priests. He doesn't really care about Israel, and kind of like having a spy in the camp.
Mm-hmm. So, but in what way do you think he means that he's responsible?
I guess he would have thought that he probably should have did something about it. I was just thinking, I don't know, since he was inquiring with the Lord, might have happened, later on in that, but I would have thought that as he was always entreating the Lord for everything and every move, that he might have not gone anywhere until he found out whether these priests were going to be safe or not.
Maybe Yahweh told him,
Here's what I think happened. Because like I say, this was very early after he left Saul.
Mm-hmm.
I think what you're witnessing here is David learning something. This goes back to our theme about David and his mighty men go to school. I think David is recognizing the fact now that he should not have trusted this Doeg dude and should have stopped him before he could get back to Saul.
Okay, yeah.
Now, that would have been a fairly bold act to do that right? Because Doeg is in the army of Israel. So a person could feel conflicted about that. They would feel, well, I shouldn't really be stopping a soldier of Israel. But now he's thinking, wow, look at what happened here. If I had done something about this, they would still be alive.
Yeah.
I don't believe he's actually saying like he's literally responsible for their death, because obviously it's Saul who's literally responsible for their death.
Yeah.
But he is learning as a leader. And as a leader, this is something that you need to do. Most of us have sort of a built-in rejection of thinking of ourselves as being guilty. We want to justify our actions. So really a lot of guys in this situation would say, well, it's not my fault because Saul did it. But this just shows you how David is a true leader, because he's looking at all times at what is happening and thinking about, okay, what should I have done? And I believe this is what we need to do as Yahweh's men. I think we have to be very honest and truthful about the things that happen in our life. We have to see where we could have done better, because this is the only way that we will do better, is for us to see this. And because of this, I think, as we go along and see some of these other incidents, we find that David even becomes bolder, and he becomes more sure of really the Spirit of God in his heart telling him things, and he acts on them with boldness. This is very important for God's men to be bold, because here's the thing. It's really good to think things over, and when you can, you should. But some things happen very quickly, and you don't have a lot of time to think about them.
Yeah.
And like this is a case like that. And it was very important for David to do something. He didn't understand it at the time. Remember, he's just a kid about 20, right? He's learning. But now, after he finds out about this, he's kind of reconsidering this, and he's learning and becoming a better leader because of what went wrong. He's not getting mired down in the fact that this happened. He's learning from it and moving forward. And that's what you have to do. If you do something that you see as having been a mistake or not the best thing you can do, well, learn from it. Make a note to do things better about that kind of situation in the future, and move on.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's a very important point, I think, because, it's so easy for us to just make up excuses in our head. Or, I've seen that a lot just with different things. And even if it's something simple, or something more like this, it's just a very crucial thing to continue to develop as a man, to consider these things and see where you could have made a different choice that would have been better.
Yes.
And strictly speaking, looking at it from that point of view, rather than getting carried away in your head or whatever about how you could have done something different. But this is something where we're growing, we're growing our confidence, and we're growing our future decision-making, really,
Mm-hmm. And, contrast this with what he did with the Philistine king, all right, when he's deceiving the Philistine king.
Yes.
Here, he's talking to the priest of Yahweh. And look at how honest he's being. This is really the heart of David. This is who David really is this really honest person who's walking in the truth. Now, this is really very important. David was not elected by anybody.
Yeah.
He was anointed and appointed by Yahweh to be who he was. What you see today is everyone is trying to get more views, more click-throughs, right? More approval of other people. And David he didn't involve himself in any of that kind of thing. He did the right thing, regardless of whether the people around him agreed with him. And I think that is such an important thing for a man of Yahweh.
Yeah.
Okay, I like this question. If you have an anointed ministry, you shouldn't have any problems.
Well, that's false.
Yes, that's false.
False.
Why would that be false?
Well, we live in a fallen world. We're dealing with sinful people. And so we have to work around all of that.
It is true. And look at David. Did he have an anointed ministry?
Absolutely.
And look at all the troubles that came on David.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was thinking of the one scripture there, smite the shepherd and the flock will. So if you're going to go towards the anointing and disrupt as much as you can just with one blow.
Right.
So it makes sense that there's going to be troubles.
The devil is going to want to stop you.
Yeah.
If you are effective, the devil's going to want to stop you, and it's going to come at you from a dozen different directions. That's what's going to happen. So that's part of being a man. It's part of being Yahweh's man.
That's right.
Mhm.
That you accept that, that's part of it, and you're a soldier.
I mean, it's always good to be watching and being able to tell, okay, you want to always be on the lookout. Where is this being directed from,
Mm-hmm.
And once you finally are able to start to see these patterns of the enemy's attacks, I think that's another really crucial thing. And David was constantly keeping checks on all these things,
Mhm.
Yeah.
and he's keeping a strong relationship with Yahweh through it is very important.
Yes.
He wasn't just making his own decisions randomly in his flesh man, and things like that. So this is another very important question. And
Right.
unfortunately, the teachers of today, they almost take away our sword and shield by telling us that we shouldn't have any problems,
Mhm.
because when the enemy shows up to attack, we're missing our sword and our shield.
Yeah,
And, people can get very badly hurt by that. So,
I believe so.
you need to know the truth and stand in Yahweh.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for sharing that, Judah.
Yeah.
1 Samuel 24, verses 2 through 4. Then Saul took 3,000 chosen men out of all Israel and went to seek David and his men on the rocks of the wild goats. He came to the sheep pens by the way, where there was a cave, and Saul went in to relieve himself. Now David and his men were abiding in the innermost parts of the cave. The men of David said to him, "Behold, the day of which Yahweh said to you, Behold, I will deliver your enemy into your hand, and you shall do to him as it shall seem good to you." Then David arose and cut off the skirt of Saul's robe secretly. 1 Samuel 24, verses 6 and 7. He said to his men, "Yahweh forbid that I should do this thing to my master, Yahweh's anointed, to put forth my hand against him, since he is Yahweh's anointed." So David checked his men with these words, and didn't allow them to rise against Saul. Saul rose up out of the cave and went on his way.
Well, this is the cave story. This is when Saul got very close to David and David's men. They were hiding. They were in the cave when Saul came into the same cave because he had to pee. And so they're all in the same cave together. And I can just kind of picture David's men whispering to him and saying, "Oh, wow, this is your lucky day.
Exactly.
Just take out your sword and end all this nonsense."
Wow.
Right? And David did cut off the skirt of Saul without Saul even knowing it.
Yeah, wow.
Now realize it's probably dark in the cave, right? So he's still not been seen. And David said to his men, "Yahweh forbid that I should do this thing to my master, Yahweh's anointed, to put forth my hand against him, since he is Yahweh's anointed. So David checked his men with these words. So he didn't allow them to attack Saul. He didn't attack Saul himself. Here's the case where David's men totally had a different picture in their head than David had.
Yeah.
And it's true, if he had killed Saul, he would have gotten rid of someone who was trying to kill him, right?
1 Samuel 24, verses 11 and 12. David said to King Saul, "See the skirt of your robe in my hand, for in that I cut off the skirt of your robe and didn't kill you. Know and see that there is neither evil nor disobedience in my hand, and I have not sinned against you, though you hunt for my life to take it. May Yahweh judge between me and you, and may Yahweh avenge me of you, but my hand shall not be on you."
Can you imagine this moment?
Wow.
Yeah.
David comes out with this piece of cloth from Saul's garment. That certainly proves that David had no intentions, no ill intentions towards Saul. And of course, he said as much, that he had not sinned against him. And he said, "May Yahweh avenge me of you, but my hand shall not be on you." So he was leaving it to Yahweh to judge, right, between them, and to bring Saul to whatever end Yahweh had in mind.
Yeah. David said in Psalm 105:15, where it says, "Touch not my anointed and do my prophets no harm."
Mm-hmm.
So he obviously understood that the battle was the Lord's, and he knew the Lord wasn't. The Lord would have been the first one to say, "Go take him."
Yeah, right.
If it was his will. So obviously, he, with his relationship, he understood you don't touch, his anointed. So
Right.
it's in.
And Saul was
it's in
still the
Yahweh's
king.
hand.
Saul was still the king, and
Yeah.
I don't think it was David's goal to kill Saul and take the throne.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, that wasn't his goal at all. I guess really the only thing would be like self-defense or whatever, but it was just really neat how David was willing to respect that order all the way up to the point when Saul eventually was killed, not by David, but by his enemies, So, so yeah, I think that's really neat.
I like that point, Michael, about David respecting the divine order.
Yeah.
And this is such an important thing to learn, I think, from David. Jude, I'm sorry I interrupted.
It's okay. I was just going to agree that, you can really see that he had a respect for Yahweh's authority. And a lot of people can't really see that or understand that. But David had a real clear understanding of the fact that Yahweh had put Saul in this place, and that even though Saul was doing some of these things that were against what Yahweh's intentions were, nevertheless, he was still the king. He still had this anointing. And this kind of reminds me of some of the things that you said about how even today we need to, up to the effect that they affect us, respect the authority in our lives.
We really do. And this includes governmental authority. Even when we're living in a time where it's so corrupt, Saul certainly was corrupt.
Yeah.
But Yahweh had put him into the position as king. And so David looked at that and he said, well, if Yahweh put him in as king, it'll have to be Yahweh that removes him as king. It's not my place to do that.
David had more training he needed too before he was ready to take up that office.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. What an example.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's go on. Okay, so we're looking here at what David had learned. What about his men? What do you think they could have learned from all of that?
As we were mentioning, a divine order. They were going with the fleshly thing, but you have to stay in his order, which is a higher order.
Where there's people like Saul who are in power, but they're corrupt and therefore they do harm to the people, right?
Yes.
It can cause a lot of anger, and then anger breeds rebellion.
Mm.
And I just want to point out that David was not a rebel.
Yeah.
He wasn't doing what he was doing because he was rebelling against Saul. He was not. And I think this is something he's also teaching his men by how he's behaving. He's saying to them essentially, we're not a bunch of rebels. We belong to this nation, and we're going to behave according to the rules of this nation.
That's a really good example.
Yeah, that's a good word.
Yes. You know, another thing that I see, and I see this a lot in our Western world, that we're so close to learning new things. And we even get offended if people suggest that we might need to learn something new. And that's another crucial thing, I think, is that, you know, these men were open to learning this difference that they initially had, where they thought this was their lucky day. And David was able to show them that there is a different way to think about it, and they were able to accept that. And I think that's another crucial thing, is that we need to continue to be open to learning Yahweh's truth, even if we're not right, you know, and just continuing to develop that way is very crucial.
Very good.
Good stuff, Judah.
1 Samuel chapter 27, verses 1 and 2. David said in his heart, I shall now perish one day by the hand of Saul. There is nothing better for me than that I should escape into the land of the Philistines, and Saul will despair of me to seek me any more in all the borders of Israel. So shall I escape out of his hand. David arose and passed over, he and the 600 men who were with him, to Achish, the son of Maoch, king of Gath.
Okay. Once again, David is feeling like he needs to get away from Saul, and he needs to escape into the land of the Philistines. So he did that. He went back to Achish again, the king of Gath. Now, we're going to get into more about what happened there, but I just want to point out that his band now has grown to 600 men.
Wow.
So it was 400 the last time we saw, and now it's 600 men. So obviously people are hearing about David and what is going on with David, and the men of action are doing something about it.
Yeah,
That's right.
Achish gave David the city of Ziklag. At that time, it was a Philistine city. It tells here what David was doing. He was raiding the Geshurites, the Girzites, and the Amalekites, and all of these ites are Canaanites. They're all the people where Yahweh commanded that they should be completely destroyed. And the reason I'm mentioning that is, as you read on here, it tells us that when David would make these raids, he would kill them all.
Yes.
And some people say, oh, well, he must have been bloodthirsty. No, he was obeying the Torah.
That's right.
Yahweh had already determined that these people were so completely wicked that they needed to be destroyed out of the land. And so he was simply following what Yahweh had said in the Torah.
and he was still commander in the army of Israel too. So,
True.
you know, he wasn't just, you know, a renegade or anything like that.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think we need to understand this about David, that he was a man of war, legitimately so. So when we read these various stories where this is happening, we need to understand that about David. That's part of who he was. It's kind of like if today you were a believer, but you were also a policeman. Well, let's say you get a call one day and there's a bank robbery, and bank robbers start coming out the door shooting guns at you. Well, you may have to defend yourself and stop these guys, right?
Yeah.
That's right.
It's part of your job to do it.
That's right.
Well, let's go on. I thought this would be a good place to talk about Ziklag and what happened at Ziklag. Now, this didn't happen immediately when they went to Ziklag, but we're skipping things. We can't possibly go into everything that happened because there's so much. But basically, while David and his men were away, the Amalekites came, and they took captive everybody, which is mostly the women and children. There might have been some old people too. And so they took them captive, took everything that was of value, and burned the entire camp of Ziklag. And then when David and his men came back, they found that this was happening. The place was burning. They found that their wives, their children were all taken captive, and they were really upset.
Yeah.
How upset would you be?
Very.
So you're the leader, and this happens. Guess what happens next?
They're mad at David.
They're all mad at David. And so mad, they're even talking about stoning him to death.
Yeah.
I just want to tell you, a lot of times people say, oh, I want to be a leader or whatever. Are you ready for this? Because things are going to go wrong.
Yeah.
And they may not be your fault at all. Like, this was not David's fault that this happened. But who are they going to point their finger at? Because you've got to blame somebody, don't you? I mean, this is how people think.
Yeah.
Right? So if you're the leader, you have to understand that this is going to happen. This sort of thing will happen with people, and you will be accused of all sorts of evil things. And that people may even want to take your life. I certainly have had death threats. I've heard people say that they were going to kill my entire family. So this happens. This kind of thing happens. And what you have to do when this happens is exactly what David did. He says he strengthened himself in Yahweh, his Elohim. You must turn to him, because there's no human being that is strong enough to put up with this.
Yeah.
You must turn to him. And it says David inquired of Yahweh. Now, realize that Abiathar's there. They have the Urim and Tumim, so he's no doubt using that. And he says, if I pursue after this troop, shall I overtake them? And Yahweh said, pursue, for you shall surely overtake them, and shall without fail recover all.
Wow.
So, I might have been tempted just to jump on my camel and run after these guys.
Yeah.
I think it's pretty cool that David stopped to take time to talk to Yahweh first.
Yeah.
And so David and his men went after these bad guys. And they came to a certain brook of Besor. And by then, 200 of the men were tired out. They just couldn't go on. So they stayed with the baggage. And David and 400 men went on. So David and his men caught up with the Amalekites. Of course, they're not expecting anybody to come. They're basically eating, drinking, dancing. They're having a big celebration because of all of their spoil. So David and his men, it says he struck them from twilight even to the evening of the next day.
Wow.
Not a man of them escaped, but there was 400 young men who rode away on camels and got away. Just like Yahweh had said, David recovered everything, including rescuing his 2 wives. The others, of course, got back their wives and children. It says there was nothing lacking. They got it all.
Wow.
And besides that, there was spoil that the Amalekites had already taken from others that was now theirs, and David got all of that. So they had this mighty victory. and even got more than what they had before. So let's go on, and then we'll talk about the whole incident. Okay, so now they get back to the 200 men that couldn't go forward. And those guys came out to meet David, and David greeted them. And then it says this, then all the wicked men and base fellows of those who went with David answered and said, because they didn't go with us, we will not give them anything of the spoil that we have recovered, except to every man his wife and children, that he may lead them away and depart. So let's talk about this a little bit.
Okay.
What do you think about what these guys are suggesting?
I like how it says the wicked men and base fellows, because it just doesn't sound just.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like the 200 men were lazy.
Mm-hmm.
I think they were pretty worn out, and they were looking after the baggage.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And also, if they didn't have anything, there wasn't anything left to go back to.
Yeah.
So what about all of that? It just
Mhm.
wasn't a just situation, a just judgment.
Why do you think these guys said this?
Well, they felt entitled because they felt like they did it themselves.
Yeah.
More for them, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right.
More for them. Well, in the next slide, we have David's answer. So I think that's interesting. David said, you shall not do so, my brothers, with that which Yahweh has given to us, who has preserved us and delivered the troop that came against us into our hand. He's saying, essentially, hey, we weren't the ones that did this. Yahweh did this. It's
Yeah.
Yahweh that gave us this victory.
Yeah.
Then he says, for as his share is who goes down to the battle, so shall his share be who tarries by the baggage. They shall share alike. And this even became a statute from thereafter that they would do that. I think this is pretty cool what David did, because I think when we remember how angry they had been against David and everything, and for him to stand up for these other men, he's showing himself to be such a godly leader here, I think.
Yes.
Kind of interesting.
I like how he says how it was Yahweh that delivered everything to them.
Yes. Yeah.
Had those other men had thought that, the wicked and base fellows, then they would think differently about it,
Mhm. You know what? Even good men can be wicked and base fellows sometimes.
It's true.
You can basically be a good guy, but under pressure, sometimes your head doesn't work right.
Yeah.
And the difference that happens with you is if you have a good leader, he keeps you from being a dummy. Right?
Yeah.
That's right.
If you don't have that influence in your life, you get into trouble.
Definitely. Yeah.
That's what happened. That's the influence of David on his men.
Mm-hmm.
He was always raising the bar and lifting them up a little higher.
Yes, he was. Yeah.
I just see two really good examples of both leadership and how we're to be as Yahweh's men here. David could have been mad at them for getting angry at him, but instead he was selfless, and he constantly was thinking still of his people that he was leading, and the same thing with the men who, sometimes men don't really like each other, and they might have had gripes against each other, but David's being a good leader, and he's really telling them how they should be thinking instead of where they're at. So
Yes.
How did David display the courage of godly leadership to his men in the Ziklag affair?
Right from the beginning, you can imagine what could David do in that situation when they come back to that there. But it says he encouraged himself in the Lord. So there's one thing this is what you guys do. Then he didn't leave it to chance. He inquired of the Lord. And so now he's refreshed and he can go to them with a sure plan
Mm-hmm.
And then Yahweh takes this Egyptian there and gives them the location of where they are. And then the other leadership there is what we just talked about there too, is how he just put the statute in there when they were going to do something evil. He says, this is not going to happen down the road anymore.
Yeah.
This is going to be a statute right now and an ordinance right now. And he, and he stood up against those men. So just godly leadership all the way across the board.
Right. Yeah, it's so true. So now we're returning to Saul, moving basically to the end of this whole situation with David. And I just want to say there's a lot more things that happen with David, but there's not really time to do all of them. So I would say if you find this an interesting study, you might want to go back to 1 Samuel. I'm talking now to our visitors today, and read more of this because the whole thing is really amazing. But anyway, the way this all ended up, Saul's story is really horrible. He ends up going to a witch. Getting advice from a witch is not a great idea, friends. No. Really, for someone like Saul, this is a complete betrayal of Yahweh to behave like that. It's just horrible. But he ends up now on Mount Gilboa with his troops fighting against the Philistines. And this is a bad day for Saul. And this is his bad day. And things got so bad for him that he ended up falling on his own sword to kill himself before he could be mutilated and abused by his enemies. And then the Philistines the next day found Saul and his 3 sons. They were all dead too, including the righteous Jonathan. And the bodies were fastened up on the wall of a Philistine city, Beth Shan. So just such a horrible end came to Saul. Then there were men of Judah, Jabesh Gilead in Judah, who actually went in and by night and took down the bodies because this was such an embarrassment for Israel. They took their bones and buried them and fasted 7 days. Because even though this king was evil, he was the king of Israel, this was really a tragedy for Israel that this happened. So what can we learn from the death of Saul? What do you think?
I have a scripture. Deuteronomy 32:35. It says, "Vengeance is mine and recompense at the time when their foot slides, for the day of their calamity is at hand. The things that are to come on them shall make haste."
Amen.
And I just kind of feel like this is really what David was referring to this whole time, that, Saul's end is going to come to him. And, it surely did, and it wasn't a righteous death.
Right.
Yeah.
I find it interesting that Saul ended up having to take his own life. I just find it interesting that, even though obviously the cause of that was the archers in the battle, it wasn't anyone in particular, but Saul himself who ended up actually taking his own life. Just kind of strange and interesting how all of that ended up happening. And even what happened, where they were hung up on the wall and everything. Just an interesting turn of events, really.
Very noble ending, isn't it?
It is.
Well, you can see the whole picture right from the beginning. Saul's pride, pride cometh before a fall. And then Samuel was talking about his sin being as, rebelling as witchcraft. So he's totally disobedient. From there, your heart can only get darker and darker. And it come to a very sad end. But that, that is a pattern that will hold true for anyone that's in righteousness. If they turn aside, things are not going to go too well.
That's right. Well, look at the difference between Saul and David. I think it's just so huge because Saul was very self-willed.
Yeah.
Yes.
He wanted to please himself. He thought as king, he was the big banana, so he could just please himself. And this is where it brought him. And David just was not that guy. He wanted to do Yahweh's will. And look at how many times, even in just the stories we looked at, that David inquired of Yahweh and then did what Yahweh said.
Yeah.
And he had success. And Yahweh always looked out for him. If you want your life to be like that, then do what David did.
It's really encouraging. I've just been, going through this, just studying for this week, and I've just been kind of thinking a lot about David. And, it just really makes me reflect on my life and the things I do day to day, and just really aspire to want to be a man who will do all of Yahweh's will. And, it's just when you face that, you see the challenge in all of that when you start looking at that.
We need the right men here at Zion. We need some more men, but we want the right men. We want men who can emulate some of these characteristics, particularly this one of doing Yahweh's will. And if any of you are out there listening and we're talking about you, do consider it and do contact us about it, because there's a lot that needs to be done here in a relatively short time. And we need good men. We need mighty men of Messiah to come and be a part of it. So just think about that.
You may not think that you're cut out for this, man, but look at the 12 disciples. Nobody thought anything about them either. He can make you everything. You just have to be willing and step up, and you will be amazed. I see myself as nothing, but where the Lord has brought me, just to stay in humility, I've been told, I haven't seen it as much, but I've been told by the men just how much growth they've seen in me in 5 years. So I tell you, it can be done, and it should be done. I am so glad that I came to this truth and joined arms with Yahweh. And that's what you have to do. Just go to Yahweh, say, this is what you want of me anyways. You want me to be a real man, and deal with this. I'm sure he will loose you and give you encouragement. And we are already telling you that he needs these men. He's looking for 144,000 of these righteous men, and you're among us. So take heart, man.
It's good.
Thanks for sharing that, Benjamin.
We pray for you every day, man.
We do, absolutely. Well, we're coming near the end of the program tonight, but I'd like to bring Dawn back on and just see if we had any comments from folks out there.
Indeed, we did on our YouTube channel. Paulina reached out to us, and she was saying, Shalom, Remnant family, and anyone who has joined us for this excellent discussion. It is so exciting to have teaching about what our Father expects from our men, so opposite of what this world does.
Absolutely.
Thanks for that comment.
That's great.
Thank you for sharing, Paulina. All right. Well, I really enjoyed this discussion with everyone. And E, it was really great having you on tonight. And I'm just glad you kind of set the stage for us here for this program, I think it was really great. And I know you've been really wanting to teach on David. And it's just really a lot to look to, and a really good example for us as men.
Well, I really enjoyed it. It was wonderful talking about David. I just really love to talk about him. And so I'm glad I could be here to talk with everybody.
Glad you could be here too, E. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
And Benjamin, we want to thank you for being on tonight, and thank you for the things you had to share and the encouragement.
It was a joy, a blessing, and insightful. I'm very thankful.
Shabbat Shalom, and we'll be looking forward to having you on next month.
Thank you.
And Judah, it's great having you on, and really enjoyed the things that you had to share.
Thank you. Thank you.
And hopefully we'll have you on again sometime soon.
Yeah, sounds good.
You have been listening to Messiah's Mighty Men. This is your host, Michael. Join Benjamin, Roger, and I, along with our special guest, each month as we discuss the biblical Hebrew roots of the Scriptures. Learn and grow into one of Messiah's mighty men. This episode of Messiah's Mighty Men was taken from one of our weekly Sabbath meetings. For more related content, visit our membership site at zion.net. That's spelled TSIYON.net. Sign up as a free member today. Also, check out our 24/7 internet radio station at zion.org. That's spelled TSIYON.org. Thanks for listening.